So at 2:45 p.m., Colleen walked out of her classroom and made her way down the hall towards the women's bathroom. Then Philip can be seen walking out into the hall, looking around a bit and wandering around for a second and then going back into the classroom. He then went back into the hallway again, this time wearing a hood over his head. Then he started walking towards the same bathroom as Colleen and pulled out a pair of gloves from his pockets. He is seen entering the same bathroom as Colleen and then puts on the pair of gloves. In the bathroom, another student walked in, but they assumed that they had just walked in on someone changing, so this other student left. At 3:07, he is seen leaving the bathroom with the hood still on his head. He then went down the hall and down a few flights of stairs and then outside into the parking lot where he can be seen running, and then he came back inside by 3:09 wearing a white t-shirt, again still running through the halls. He then went back into the classroom and came out once again at 3:11, now wearing a red sweatshirt over his head, carrying what looks like 3 bags, one being a lunchbox and the others being backpacks, and then he went downstairs. He then came back upstairs without the bags and again is just running through the halls. He then can be seen walking through the hall with a recycling bin and returned back to the bathroom by 3:16. At this point, he had put on a black ski mask. He then came out of the bathroom at 3:22, this time wearing his white t-shirt and a black mask while pulling the recycling bin. He then goes into an elevator and goes outside, still with the recycling bin. He can be seen bringing the recycling bin around the school, and this entire time he can be seen walking past several people who don't interact with him. Then he can be seen entering the school again wearing his white t-shirt and now without the recycling bin, and he appears to be barefoot. He then goes into the bathroom again at 4:02 and changes into a black hoodie and shorts, carrying a white Nike backpack, and is still barefoot. He is then seen in the parking lot talking to another student, and these students also appear to be barefoot for some reason. We later find out that these are some of his teammates on the soccer team, and he's telling them not to go back into the school. He talks to the student for a few minutes before walking off. At 4:24, he is now seen wearing shoes again and is still wearing the black hoodie. He enters the school again and can be seen walking the halls. At some point, he then grabs another backpack, a red Nike backpack, and carries it with his white backpack. He then walks down the stairs and through the halls, and by 4:30, he finally leaves the school. Now, like I said, Colleen was still living at home at the time of her death, so when she didn't get home from work at her normal time, her dad was immediately worried, and he went over to Danvers High School to look for her. But he didn't find her anywhere, so he contacted another teacher at the school to see if she had seen Colleen, but she hadn't. So both Thomas and Peggy went over to the Danvers police station to report Colleen as missing. Around this same time, Philip's mother reported him missing after he didn't show up for soccer practice at his normal time. But initially, police did not connect the two. They started looking for each of them as two separate cases. But then, by 12:30 a.m. on October 23rd, police found Philip walking on the side of the road on a nearby highway. So, police pulled over and they stopped him. He was carrying a backpack at the time, and so police decided to search it. Inside of the backpack, police found a box cutter that was absolutely covered in blood, and when police asked Philip where this blood came from, he simply stated, "The girl." Also, inside of his backpack, they found Colleen's credit card as well as her underwear, so immediately police arrested him and charged him with murder. Before that point, police had been searching for Colleen everywhere, but after finding Philip, they knew that they were now searching for a body, and they actually ended up finding her very quickly. She was found in a wooded area right by the school, and her body was in horrific condition. She had very clearly been violently attacked. They also found a note near her body which read, "I hate you all." Near her body, they found a recycling bin, and inside of the recycling bin, they found a pair of gloves that were soaked in blood. Turns out, Philip had followed Colleen into the bathroom and then murdered her by slashing her throat 16 times, and then went on to rape her. Now, like I said earlier, a student had walked in on them as all of this was taking place, but the student immediately left because she just assumed that somebody was changing. Then, after being interrupted, he went out and got the recycling bin and then put her body into it and then took her to the wooded area where he dumped her body on the ground and then sexually violated her once again. So, like I said, Philip was arrested and charged with Colleen's murder because it was obvious that he killed her. So, after being charged with the murder, the prosecution wanted to charge him as an adult. But I guess as he was awaiting trial, he was staying at a youth facility. But while in this facility, he committed yet another heinous crime against another woman. In 2014, he attacked a 28-year-old staff member at the facility that he was staying at. He sat and watched her and waited for the perfect moment when nobody was watching. He watched her as she walked into the locker room and then followed her in there and took off his shoes to make sure that she did not hear him coming behind her. He then got up behind her, surprised her, slammed her against a wall, choked her, punched her, and then stabbed her with a pencil. Luckily, another staff member heard what was going on nearby, so they rushed in to save her. So luckily, she did end up being okay. He did end up being charged with attempted murder for this, but it wasn't allowed to be brought up in his upcoming murder trial. Apparently, this was because since it wasn't related, it didn't need to be brought up since the jury's one and only job was to hear the details of Colleen's murder and then decide if Philip was guilty of it. But thankfully, he was tried and found guilty of this attack in a later trial. So the trial for Colleen's murder started on November 16th, 2015, and at that point, Philip was 16 years old and was being tried as an adult. He was being charged with murder in the first degree, 2 counts of rape, and robbery. Obviously, everybody knew that Philip had murdered Colleen. There was no arguing that. It was obvious. So, the defense's only choice was to come up for an argument as to why this happened and why Philip was not responsible for his actions. The defense made the argument that Philip was suffering from a severe mental illness and that he was in the state of psychosis when he murdered Colleen. Therefore, he's not criminally responsible for his actions. So first, the defense brought forward a bunch of Philip's family and friends to speak on his character. They all described him as a well-behaved, normal, kind young boy who became more and more withdrawn and quiet in the weeks leading up to Colleen's murder. They also brought forward a psychiatrist named Dr. Richard Dudley, who took the stand to talk about Philip's psychosis at the time. He argued that Philip had actually been on the schizophrenia spectrum since the age of 10, and that something triggered him to have a psychotic episode and murder Colleen. He said that Philip had heard voices that commanded him to carry out this task. He said that Philip genuinely believed that he was a ninja at the time of the murder, and that is why he did what he did. So then members of the family took the stand to testify about the family's long-standing history of mental illness. Philip's grandfather Eduardo described how his late ex-wife had many bouts of mental illness, which led her to having shock therapy in the 1970s. Now, he did concede that none of these other family members who suffered from mental illness had ever done anything violent, but this does show that the family has a long-standing history of being perfectly fine mentally and then going into these random episodes of psychosis. It runs in their family, so that must be how it happened to Philip. So that's basically what the defense argued, that he was in this state of psychosis and then suddenly snapped when she brought up Tennessee, and that is what caused him to just go into overdrive, not even know what he was doing, and then murder her. That this entire thing was in the state of mental crisis and that he didn't know what he was doing. Therefore, he shouldn't be held responsible for his actions. The prosecution came back and said that Philip was not, in fact, in the midst of a mental break when this happened. They argued that this entire thing was completely planned out and that his motive was due to a desire for sexual relations with Colleen. So first, the prosecution argued that there was premeditation for this murder. Surveillance video from the school showed that he showed up to school already carrying a box cutter, gloves, a ski mask, and a change of clothes. Then he placed all of these items in a separate backpack and then placed it into his locker. Then surveillance video shows him going into his locker and grabbing this second backpack before going into math class that day. So clearly he went to school prepared with these items, put them in his locker, and then went to class bringing these items knowing that he was going in there to hurt Colleen. So after about 4 weeks of hearing testimony from both sides, 17 jurors went into deliberation on December 15th, 2015. They actually deliberated for over 10 hours over the course of 2 days before delivering their verdict. They found him guilty of first-degree felony murder, armed robbery for stealing her credit card and underwear, and 1 count of aggravated rape. He was found not guilty of the second charge because the jury did decide that she was dead at the time that her body was taken into the woods. As the verdict was read, Philip showed absolutely no emotion. Now, it's a little bit confusing because he did face the charges as an adult, and he received a sentence of 15 to 25 years to life for the murder, and then 40 years for the robbery, and then 40 years for the rape, all of which are being served concurrently. It's confusing because he is up for parole in 15 to 25 years for the murder, but he faced 40 years for the other charges, which kind of makes no sense to me, but because of that, he probably won't be up for parole until he's in his 50s. It just shatters my heart that she was murdered because she was trying to help somebody. She literally went out of her way to help Philip, and he repaid her by taking her life. It's disgusting, and I'm really happy that he's behind bars because, especially given this other attack that he committed against this other woman, it's obvious that he would have kept doing this if he was allowed to be out of prison.